Extra credits. You know, I really gotta stop dangling the bait in front of my audience for these kinds of videos, but hey, if it helps me pay for more fun videos, who am I to say no?
Not my fault I can't say no.
So, what's this video about?
Species in your game, as ugly, warlike, and malevolent, might be harmful to real-world groups, regularly mischaracterized as ugly, warlike, and malevolent.
Okay. That's just a snippet that I took out of context for the sake of a joke. I'm sure there's a logical reason for this. What's the worst that could happen?
Technical nuke incoming!
Oops.
If you paid attention to the game's discourse on the internet during 2019 and 2020, you might have noticed a reoccurring argument about some species from fantasy media. Specifically, orcs. Now, not to worry. This episode isn't going to be just another member of the chorus talking about how if all orcs in a game are blindly evil, that it's racist. Instead, we want to discuss how that particular choice is simply bad game design.
And yet, throughout this video, we'll see that you'll use that loophole in order to make it out to be racist. Something that the viewers wouldn't miss. Clarify something when it comes to all or nothing with the races. I kinda do agree that it shouldn't just be all or nothing, with a caveat.
Hi, I can explain. Give me a chance. I can tell you why I'm playing this game.
There is some nuance to that. I don't think it's bad design, but rather simple design. That all creatures of a single race being all good or all evil isn't necessarily terrible game design, but it's used for more easier digestible stories. Don't get me wrong, nuance to me is always a good thing. And as someone who's been playing Fallout New Vegas as of late, let me give an example of how having more nuance can enhance the game design and story.
Good luck with that.
In the game New Vegas, there's a race of creatures called super mutants. As the name implies, they're humans who have mutated into huge hulking monsters that could rip you in two if they wanted. And there's even a variation called Nightkin. In the first few instances you encounter the Nightkin, you're introduced to Tabitha, a Nightkin who effectively took over a super mutant in settlement, constantly insults the inferior mutants.
I guess it's time we talked about the dum-dums. Oh, you mean the second generation super mutants who aren't so bright? That's them.
And if you listen to the radio broadcast, you piece together that she might have a screw loose and have a secondary personality. Sure, you can go in and kill her. And that does indeed finish the quest, crazy. But there's a peaceful solution, as you learn that there's a broken robot that used to be her friend, and she essentially is just lashing out because of it.
Rhonda? Is that you?
It is, Mistress Tabitha. How I've missed you so. This stranger here fixed me up right as rain. Is she a friend of yours?
I don't know how to thank you for bringing Rhonda back to me, stranger.
I simplified that example of it, but the point is, I love that sort of stuff. And it's even more so when you learn later in the game that the Nightkin all seem to suffer from a form of schizophrenia due to an item that they use a lot. Nuance like that is certainly intriguing and can add to the gameplay experience. But that depends on the type of game we're talking about. Fallout New Vegas is essentially an insert-yourself RPG, where you can determine what you can and can't do. 'Cause that's Vegas, baby! However, when you compare it to, say, I don't know, Doom? I don't care what the demon's motives are. They killed my pet bunny and I want to slaughter them all for revenge with a chainsaw! Nuance like that is very dependent. It's dependent on the type of game. And not all RPGs need to have such deep understanding for the player to get invested or immersed into said games. Sometimes people just want to go into a game to slice and dice random dudes. And it doesn't need a deep dive since in the games, it's just for fun for people to do so. That's kind of the rut that Extra Credits fails to consider in this video and paints an extremely broad brushstroke, which is really ironic when you consider what they say later.
Real quick up top, please welcome James Mendez Hodes, who guest wrote this episode. Thanks so much, Mendez. Much of the recent conversation on orcs points out that characterizing a whole species in your game as ugly, warlike, and malevolent might be harmful to real-world groups regularly mischaracterized as ugly, warlike, and malevolent.
Yeah, that context didn't really help. It's still a comparison and one that really shouldn't have been made in this regard, especially with the words chosen. They could have just gone with stereotype without going to the specifics, and I'm sure people wouldn't have been as quick to jump onto the lynch mob for this. Also, notice the wording there, might. Gotta love the use of weasel words in this little section right here. Yes, it might be harmful, but it might not be harmful. If this video is merely talking about how having a clear-cut good guy and bad guys, especially of those of a regular singular race, and how that can be seen as lazy game design, I wouldn't agree, but I could see where people are coming from. But despite what they say here,
we're going to talk about something related. Why characterizing a group like this in your game can be lazy at best, and at worst, actively harmful to the world you're creating.
There are a lot of problems with how extra credits go about this, and we're going to go through them.
Let's go!
When designing a game's world and populating it with fictional species, a designer might be tempted to differentiate them from one another by certain inalienable qualities, like their moral alignment. Violent versus peaceful, law versus chaos, good versus evil, and the like. It's a common trope in speculative fiction.
Yeah, and that implies it's successful and works to a degree. Tropes in and of themselves are not bad, how they're executed is, and doing nothing but broad brushstrokes does nothing to help this matter. Here's the key difference. These creatures are fictional races, not actual ones in the real world, and as such, they're more or less allowed to fluctuate with the creativity of the writers and designers. And again, this ignores the context of what these games and stories are using these creatures for evil are doing.
But especially in the context of a game, painting an entire species with the same moral brush actually weakens the entire thing. This idea that a certain subgroup, like race, nationality, or sex, has inalienable traits, is called biological essentialism, or simply bioessentialism. And it's a valid way to talk about qualities like how many legs an animal has, or whether it can fly. But all too often, this concept gets misused in untrue statements, like pit bulls are a violent breed, men are more logical than women, or Asians are better at math. Now chances are, if a game is set in the real world, that the designers are avoiding these tropes because they aren't real, as multiple fields of societal and hard science can readily prove to you. But speculative fiction offers us an opportunity to reify or make real various things which don't exist, or to exaggerate things which do.
Then what the hell is the point of this video? This is not real!
She's not real!
To point out, stereotypes in the real world are not okay. I can't believe I have to say that nowadays, but some joke is going to take it that way because of this video. People who do believe in stereotypes like that are immature, act bigoted, and in all honesty aren't worth your time in that regard. Here's the problem though, you shouldn't see the real world through a fictional lens. Fiction is just that. Fiction. Do not assume things that you see in fiction are true. Sure, you can take things like morals and lessons from media like, say...
Believe it or not, every year some ignorant kid takes a ride in a clothes dryer just like this one and ends up getting hurt.
It burns!
But you shouldn't be expecting the real world to be equivalent to that of fiction.
Now, bioessentialism is a tempting idea in fantasy for some of the same reasons as it is in the real world. Because to our human minds, broad generalizations are comforting.
Projection is one of the commonest psychic phenomena. Everything that is unconscious in ourselves we discover in our neighbor, and we treat him accordingly.
They reduce the world to simple cut and dry categories.
Oh, the irony! It's too much!
All orcs bad, all elves good, root for these folks, not for these folks. But just like in the real world, bioessentialism can present problems in fiction as well, specifically a moral one. The idea that a sapient species can inherently tend towards good or evil acts, or lawful or chaotic ones.
So, question. Are we not allowed to reference harmful ideas like this in fiction? We can't talk about this stuff in a nuanced manner? This is weird because the video that Extra Credits links to in the cards at the end of their video had this.
Playing a game that pushes your personal boundaries can feel the same. It can be scary to dredge up the darker parts of your psyche and bring them out for everyone to see. And sometimes it can be cathartic to play through that kind of scenario, or even just be a little evil in a game. Because that purging of fear, terror, or self-loathing that comes from being in a simulated environment that feels dangerous or stressful is really quite safe. And that's the key factor: safety.
These are fictional stories. They don't impose actual consequences onto the players, and that it's a good thing to introduce these sorts of challenges towards people. I'm of the mind that media should not always coddle its audience. You should be able to challenge yourself for what you read, what you play, what you experience. That's how you grow as a person. It's how you get introduced to new ideas and decide whether or not you think they're good.
And that moral essentialism actually undercuts the greatest strength games can bring to storytelling: the player's own power to make meaningful, interesting choices and judgments for their characters, including moral ones. So if a game's creative choices apply a moral valuation to every member of an entire species before the players even meet them, well, now that's just taking that power away from the players.
Is it? Again, I refer you to my example with the Nightkin, and how my first encounter with them and the super mutants made a negative connotation for me as the player.
A place of safety and healing. A paradise in the far beyond. Preparations for the great journey were nearly complete when the demons appeared. The demons appeared from nowhere, Except it might be more accurate to say they never actually appeared at all. The demons are invisible. Where one of them stands, the most one sees is the air shimmering, like sunlight on water. They set upon us as we were on our way to worship one morning. We had just entered the basement. My flock fought bravely and killed a few, but at such cost. Nearly half of us died or went missing. The rest of us retreated up here. One of the demons raved at us, but they have not tried to attack us since.
Just because there's a preconceived established trait in the game about a race, that doesn't mean that it's taking the power away from the players. Even then, this is such a broad generalization of games. Heck, even in games that are decades old have tackled this subject really well. One example off the top of my head is Tales of Symphonia has this theme going on where elves, half-elves, and humans are pretty much races towards each other. Heck, one of the main characters, Zelos, pragmatically explains that he does realize that such attitudes are unfounded, and that half-elves are no different from anyone else.
しかし、リフィル様とガキンチョがハーフエルフだったとはな。
なんだよ、お前まで差別するつもりか？
そう言うけどな。生まれた時からこっちはそういう教育を受けてるんだぜ。ハーフエルフは愚かで野蛮で汚らわしい生き物だって。
お前！
怒るなよ、一般論だ。まだちょっとしか一緒にいないけど、俺たちと変わらないいいやつだってことはわかるぜ。
ならいい。
分かってても割り切れないのが差別ってやつの根本なんだよな。
But even though there are established traits of a race like that, you're not taking power from the players, especially when you consider that this is an overly broad brushstroke, since it ignores what the actual story of the games are trying to convey, or if they're going for something simple. Heck, even the monsters shown on screen with the slime monsters ignore a very key concept for not being brought up. A lot of these monsters are just acting on animal instinct. I know they brought up sentience earlier in the video, but who's to say that these creatures are sentient or aren't just monsters based on their animalistic traits?
And in turn, if a group of orcs, for instance, doesn't even have a choice about their actions, are they actually evil? Because look, if a person, say, destroys a house, we call that evil because they chose to do so. But if a tornado destroys a house, well, I mean, is wind evil? No.
Did you just pull a Mass Effect 3 here?
Fire burns. Is it at war? Is it in conflict? Or is it simply doing what it was created to do?
Wind and fire are acts of nature. It's unbound by things like thought, agency, or programming. This is a really stupid comparison since if we're going by sentience, and heck, we're also ignoring this more potential context. If a house is destroyed by people, you'd think they're evil, and the same thing would apply to things like orcs. Regardless of not if they were raised evil or not. Especially if it was your house, you would think that they're evil.
Therefore, if a game's world building chooses to program every member of a species to destroy, aren't they more like the tornado?
No, because in the context of a story, if a monster is coming to attack me, I'm not just going to stand around and go, "Oh hey buddy!"
Now if the player's characters are able to make moral choices, but an entire class of NPCs is inherently evil regardless of their choice, then the game is either telling the player that moral choices don't matter, or it's simply driving a wedge between the player's morality and the morality that applies to the rest of the world, blocking the player from further becoming a part of it.
Moral, or choices in general, are a limitation of programming and design because the games can't account for every single action that the player may want to do. If we did that, that would not only cost a lot of money, time, manpower, but would also be a nightmare to program, and will oftentimes not make sense. I'm currently working on a script where I talk about Life is Strange, and one of the game's most insufferable moments is when Chloe gets on your ass for taking a phone call from a friend who's been going through a hard time. And the game makes it a moral choice, cause apparently Max, the main character, can't answer her phone on the way to the truck, or Chloe can't stand not being the center of attention for a few minutes.
Okay, but now you might be asking, what if you're playing the kind of game where you're engaging in violence because it's exciting and fun, not because of its moral dimensions, where the meaningful choice is about tactics rather than ethics? Maybe the goal is to take moral calculus out of the problem. Sure, one solution might be saying, all orcs are evil, go ahead and shoot them. But in that situation, as soon as someone inadvertently feels some empathy, as people often do for anything seeming even vaguely alive,
Burn them with flamethrowers.
the easy answer becomes less easy. And if the goal of your game is to stop players from engaging in moral debates and just fight some bad guys, you kinda gotta say something more reliable than, "Oh, it's fine, they were all born this way."
So what you're saying, it's okay to have fun without actually thinking about the morality of things, but you immediately brush that off. Who is making this rule that you have to do that? Sometimes you don't need a deeper reason than, these guys are dicks, go smack them around! Especially if the story of the game isn't tailored to a player choice. We're talking about games in general, but most games don't offer moral choices. So is it okay when that sort of mechanic isn't in the games, or what? Now, these are questions that I'm actually curious about, but Extra Credits doesn't want to answer them and prefers to go down more general with these.
Fortunately, the real world's made progress on this problem, because sometimes in this day and age, people actually bear visual signifiers which say, I'm evil, not because of where I was born, but because of the choices I've made, such as Nazi uniforms and clan hoods. Then in fiction, we have things like the Hydra logo, a clear visual signifier, but one that denotes choice, not birth.
Not necessarily. You see, this ignores things such as evil people who are being brought up in evil environments, or being forced into a belief system. Or if we want to look towards other ideas, what about clones? Then there's things like brainwashing. Or what about conflicting sides? Surely during times of war, both sides would paint the other as evil based on their own moral values. We've even seen that in our own world at times.
And if the statement that a game is making with its backstory and symbols is that an enemy had a choice, and they chose wrong, then that gets way less complicated for a game that's interested in uncomplicated violence.
So, choosing evil is a moral kill, but being born evil is an immoral kill. Huh? Okay, so let me break it down. When those who choose evil might be doing evil for reasons that are complicated, such as doing evil things for their own survival, or doing things for the betterment of their loved ones or something, it's okay to kill them, because they made a choice. You know, this actually was brought up in Metal Gear Rising of all things.
Let me ask you, all those cyborgs you've killed up to now, maybe they weren't kids, but they were people. You ever think about them? When you're chopping them into hamburger?
They're adults. They made their choice.
Sure they're adults. Sure they signed up for this. Right on the dotted line of their BMC contract. Usually they're no strangers to war. In fact, many times they already lost a limb or two. Many times they were out of work and starving on the street. So yes, they sign up for surgery to fight God knows where. How else would you provide for your family when your country's embroiled in civil war? Pain receptors shut down, pumped full of fear-inhibiting nanomachines and sent right into the blender? Your blender? But they made their choice, right?
Now, if someone chose to be evil, there's a chance you can redeem them, talk them out of their situation. For all the talk of there being nuance, the idea that it'd be more morally correct to kill an individual who's multifaceted, who's capable of doing both good and bad, is just puzzling to me.
The suggestion that human people might be below moral concern because of what we believe their clothing says about them. If you have less moral concern about shooting a human because they're wearing a certain uniform than shooting a member of another species that is biologically oriented towards your destruction, then I'm just not sure what to say to you.
So whether a game does or doesn't want its players to overthink their characters' moral choices, evil as a choice is just more effective than evil as a bioessential trait.
Wait, what? Why is the xenomorph evil? It's not evil, it's doing what it does via its nature. It's a wild animal. What, do you think they do this? There's a little more here for their video, but I don't want to give more of a headache than I have to, and I'm running out of booze, so Extra Credits video is focused on the bigoted behavior in fiction, and that it's a bad thing. That we can have that sort of mindset in games, even if it's shown to be a bad. There are so many factors that aren't being taken into consideration here, and it's laughable that they miss the irony of what they did, where they complain about generalization, yet they do the exact same thing, especially with their examples not being really the best. But hey, this was a commissioned video. I want to thank everyone who supported this video's creation, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks, I guess? Bye-bye!